All right, welcome to the Brownie Points podcast. Starting off with our big takeaway, the Browns beat the Jags. They were winning most of the game. The Jags had tried to come back late, but for the most part, the Browns had control of this game. What's your big takeaway?
Actually, I've thought about a few things going into this, and I thought about it from a couple more obvious points, and a couple things come to mind regarding how Joe Flacco's playing, and hey, comes back a second game, and again, shows up in similar ways in the way that he played well, and then had some mistakes, and then the defense played a lot better, and that occurred to me. But my actual takeaway is this receiving core has never been the problem. This receiving core is actually pretty good. They're not terrible. They're not, amazing, but they're actually pretty good. They've made a lot of plays. And since Joe Flacco's come in, and mostly without Watson, you've seen guys like Elijah Moore make plays. You've seen guys just now, this game, you see Cedric Tillman make a couple big plays. David Bell even caught a 40-yard touchdown pass. Not to clarify it was open and all that, but he made the pass, he got open, he made the play, and completed it. And, you saw Njoku make big plays. And Cooper also made big plays as well, but it wasn't Cooper and then question mark. It was several people showing up when it mattered. Different games, different guys have shown up when it matters. And you've seen a more complete receiving core. I'm not saying it's a top-tier receiving core, but it is a solid receiving core, and there is more talent, which on one hand makes you feel better. That's okay, I don't need to tear down this receiving core and replace it. On the other hand, it makes you very nervous about that huge investment you've made in your starting quarterback, who seemingly could not connect with anyone but Cooper. So it's a big takeaway that makes you really question even more what's going to happen next year. And we already had questions about Watson, so it just adds more questions. But my takeaway, it's this receiving core. They're actually pretty good. There is more talent to it. It's not just Cooper. There are other guys, and if you get them involved, they can be involved and make plays and be relevant. So you can look around. And Flacco is a guy who feels like a great fit for what Stefanski wants to do. And so he's able to find these other guys, and these other guys are showing up now.
Yeah, I think something that we're really noticing is that there isn't an over-reliance on Amari Cooper, because in the previous games, with the other quarterbacks, it felt a lot like you had said in your own words, right? Amari Cooper plus run game. It was just, if they were throwing the ball, it was going to Amari Cooper, and then every once in a blue moon it went to Njoku. But recently, we've seen a wider array of wide receivers getting involved. We saw Cedric Tillman even catch a couple balls. Njoku caught some balls. Cooper caught some balls. Elijah Moore caught some balls. But it does seem like the distribution is a bit more spread out. And we are seeing some of our players emerging just a little bit more. Cedric Tillman had a couple nice plays, runs after the catch. So he showed some ability there, which was nice. For me, my big takeaway is that the defense is back. I mean, this defense was coming off back-to-back games where they gave up over 30 points, which is devastating for a team like this who's looking to heavily rely on their defense. The defense is supposed to be almost like the focal point of their attack in a way, right? The defense is the forefront of this team. It's the backbone of this team, I should say. And then the scoring is almost secondary to how they try to win games. And in the last couple weeks, we knew that that's something we couldn't see going forward. And this week, against a pretty good offense, Trevor Lawrence was back. Yes, I know he had a tweaked ankle, but he didn't look like it. If you didn't tell me anything about that ankle and I watched that game, I wouldn't have said there was something off. He looked normal. He moved normally. He planted off his back foot. He ran the same as he always ran. I think Trevor Lawrence was fully healthy. I don't think that affected anything. So I think it was a good, true test. Christian Kirk, again, was also out, so that's also a factor, but our top corner was out. So it's still their number 2 receivers against our 2 running back, against our 2 corner, their 3 receiver against our 3 corner. So I think the way their offense matched up versus our defense was all still pretty fair, even though they were still missing their top wide receiver. And coming into that game, the Browns really did a great job. They gave up over 20 points, but the reality is, if you watch it, you know that 14 of those points were given up solely because of turnovers by the Browns offense, giving them the ball with 30 yards to go, 20 yards to go, and there's only so much defense you can be doing. And they even had a play where the Jags had the ball, I think, at the 50-yard line because of a turnover, and the Browns defense was still able to hold them and not allow them to get basically anything, and they couldn't even get a field goal out of that. So there was even more plays where it could have been even worse, but they were so dominant in this game. The Jags basically couldn't get anything done until the very end of the game, and at that point, I want to say it's garbage time, but it kind of almost was garbage time at that point. So that was really impressive from them. So that's my big takeaway from that. But when you're thinking about this game and how it went, the Browns were in control this whole time. Again, the Jags made a bit of a comeback late, but the Browns were in control of this game for the most part. Even the times where it was closer, it was within a touchdown, it was always only because the Browns had a turnover and that gave them the chance. So you knew that the Jags offense was still kind of fluky. So when the Jags were getting the ball back, you never felt like the Browns weren't in control. You felt like, hey, if the Jags have the whole length of the field to go, the defense is going to get the stop on them. So even though the game was within a touchdown for a lot of it, you still always felt like the Browns were in control. So I think that's really impressive from them, and it's really important that they get back on track. And I think we're going to see this performance similarly again next week, but we're going to talk about that in the Look Ahead episode. What are the key moments from you, though, from thinking about this game? What were the turning points?
Yeah, and just a quick note regarding the defense. It does feel a little bit like, number one, some of their players, particularly guys like Hurst, play a lot better at home, for sure. And secondarily, it does also feel like a lot hinges down to who Emerson is matched up with. If he's matched up with someone who he can deal with, like, great, and he can play really, really well. But if he's out of realm, wherein he has to face like a Puka Nacua, like a really good receiver, then we might be really in big trouble. And then it all shifts from there. You have to overcompensate, and then you're in other areas. So it feels like, for the most part, they're back. But I do have my moments where it depends on the team, depends on the matchup. To be fair, that's typically how it works. But that does feel like the weak matchup. If the right receiver, if it's a team with that receiver, and either it's a third receiver or someone's out, Ward or Newsome, then we could potentially be in trouble. But otherwise, it's great defense. Regarding the pivotal moments, there's a few. It's harder to pin down so many because it wasn't really a game where it felt like this back and forth battle where there was one or two big moments. So it's harder to pin them down exactly, but I would say that the 55-yard field goal by Hopkins, that's a big play. Obviously, that puts you up 2 possessions. It's a long field goal. It's not a gimme. He comes up there, he nails it. It makes a 2-possession game, and they went down and scored a touchdown. But guess what? It was 2 possessions, and so you could say, hey, maybe they wouldn't have given up the touchdown, but they would have had their shot. You don't know what happens. A lot of things happen in the NFL when it's a 1-possession game and it's near the end. And Lawrence does have a pedigree. He does like to play in the clutch. You don't know what'll happen. So getting that on a long field goal attempt, that's big. So that's probably the biggest pivotal moment that stands out to me is a single pivotal moment. Secondarily, you can bring up the Garrett sack on the 4th down attempt. I mean, look, if they get it, they're within a field goal. It doesn't matter in the end because the Browns recovered. But at that point in time, you're thinking, hey, look, if they would have gotten it, it means they have to get a touchdown now instead of only a field goal. And if they get a field goal, they would have won. So in that way, it still was a pivotal moment. Besides for that, I would probably say the Newsome interception, actually. There was a few interceptions earlier, and Emerson made some great plays for sure, but it was already later in the game, and they were trying to get out of it, and then Newsome made that interception. The Browns had good field position. They kind of just drove down, and it kind of felt like the game was very much in the Browns' hands at that point. So those are the moments that stick out to me.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest moment was the second touchdown of the game because the Browns have often done pretty well, actually, in the first drive, offensively. And part of that is because it's scripted. Kim Stefanski, I think, is a pretty good mind, so they tend to do pretty well on those. But I think getting that second touchdown was really pivotal, especially as fans watching, because that was the moment where you were like, okay, the offense is going to be able to move. We're going to be able to make plays against this defense, against the Jags. What we saw last week from Joe Flacco wasn't a complete fluke. It's not like he was a world beater today, but he was pretty good. Again, I think he did build on what he did last week. And so I think that was encouraging, and I think seeing that second touchdown really helped solidify that this team's going to be able to score some points. And we ended up scoring 31 in the end, so more than an acceptable number. The defense was dominant, but if it wasn't for those turnovers, this game would have finished 31-14 maybe even. This would have been a really dominant win. The Jags wouldn't even had a chance late in the game. So that was kind of a key moment for me. I think what you mentioned, of course, like the Greg Newsome interceptions are, of course, like the most key moments, but I just wanted to add something different instead of just repeating, what you said, because those are obviously the most pivotal moments in that game. But let's talk about our players in that game. Let's talk about the standouts. So this is going to be our Brownie Points segment. So again, we're going to give out 3 Brownie Points, 2 Brownie Points, 1 Brownie Point to the standout players on offense, and then we'll do the same for the standout players on defense. This is how we give our shout-outs and awards to the best players on offense and on defense for the Browns. So starting us off, Levi, who is getting your Brownie Points for the offense?
So for the offense, 3 Brownie Points is going to go to David Njoku. So In past games, he's definitely had some frustrating moments in the last couple games. This game, for whatever reason, they didn't seem to use him much in the second half, which felt a little bizarre, but he had a phenomenal first half. He led the team at 90 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns, big plays. He had a couple big stiff arms, just completely dominated the defender on them. One to get into the end zone in that first big touchdown play. 2, again, these were big touchdowns over 30 yards. Way to show up when it matters. Lead the team and not make the mistakes that we've seen from him in the past. We've just done some dumb things like a previous weeks, that play where he catches the ball but he has 1 foot out of bounds for no reason. It's just barely out of bounds. Like, dude, you got to know where to put your feet before the ball comes in. Like, this is rookie stuff. But he didn't do that this game. So he made big plays. He made plays when it mattered. He did his signature, get a little more yardage than you're expected to get. He found a way. And for that reason, he does get 3 brownie points for me. 2 is going to be Joe Flacco. He had a good game. He threw for over 300 yards. Wasn't a ton of dimes per se, but there were a lot of good throws, a lot of good decisions. But he gets 2. He gets 2 and not 3 because he also did make some mistakes. He did throw a pick that was a little mind-boggling. And some people bring up that there might have been pass interference on that play. But there was also 3 defenders in the area on a 5-yard pass, and maybe that's not the best idea. So it was also an aggressive game. There have been a lot of aggressive defending plays, and they hadn't called pass interference, so you can't rely on that. And then, of course, he has the fumble as well. So because of there being 2 turnovers, which actually played a huge role in the Jaguars scoring at all, he goes to 2 instead of 3. And then at 1, I actually do have Amari Cooper, Mr. Steady, 7 for 77, all 7s for him. Real lucky. But, he didn't have the most outstanding game. He didn't have that show-up game where you're like, whoa, Cooper was all over the place, but just consistently made a play throughout the game to help you move the offense along, keep us on target. It's kind of like one of those real quiet 75, 80-yard rushing games from some team, for some guys. So it's what it felt like. 3 yards in a cloud of dust, 5 yards, 6 yards, a lot of those necessary plays that move the offense along. So Coop showing up, he gets 1. What are your brownie points?
Yeah, it was definitely another solid game for Amari Cooper. Typically, we tend not to have that much disagreement when it comes to brownie points, which makes sense. Usually, it's fairly obvious who the standouts are. It usually doesn't take a massive genius to watch the game and be like, they were great, they were pretty good, they were also pretty good, So we tend not to have too much disagreement. That's definitely that's the case again today. At 30 brownie points, I also have Dave Njoku. He did well whenever they gave him the ball. The second half, I don't know what was going on. He wasn't really targeted at all, so I'm not going to put that blame on him. It's possible that the defense adjusted and focused more on taking away Njoku, and that's what happened. I'm not really sure because, you're watching the game live. You can't really know those kinds of things as you're watching it, but good game from him still overall. Obviously, those 2 touchdowns from him. He had another play where I think he did mention where he had they threw the ball to him and then he stiff armed a guy and was able to still get that first down, which is also really helpful just to keep the drive going. So that was really big from him. Very nice game. At 2 brownie points, also got Joe Flacco, and at 1 brownie point, I also got Amari Cooper. Again, not going to touch on too much because you already talked about that. But let's talk about the defense. Who were the standouts on defense? Because again, if you just look at the score, you think, okay, Browns defense did a little better than last week, but still could be better. But no, if you watch this game, the defense was dominant. They were dominant in this game. The Jags could not get anything going almost the entire game. They only got anything going because we gave them the ball with 30, 20 yards to go. They were able to get that done. But other than that, they could barely do anything up until the very end. Who are your standout players to you from defense? Who made that happen?
So 3 goes to MJ Emerson. And MJ Emerson, and this is a little close between him and Newsome, but MJ Emerson takes it. So Newsome's going to be my number 2 with 2 brownie points. But I'm going to give 3 in the edge to Emerson because he did make big plays when it mattered. And the interceptions he made, first of all, he got 2 interceptions. That's huge. But they weren't easy catches. They were really tough catches. And sometimes when you're not, especially, okay, for every corner this applies, but especially when you're not a top tier corner, when you're not the guy who's Revis Island, you need to capitalize on your opportunities. Not all of them are going to be in the breadbasket. So when it's in your vicinity, it's time to step up. And he did that multiple times. They were not easy. One of them, he had a diving interception. He had to go behind him and adjust on a play, and he caught it. And he made the right play when it mattered. MJ Emerson is pretty good. I don't think he has the speed and talent to be a Denzel Ward-esque corner. But he's a good corner, and when the opportunities came, he capitalized. And that's the key. So he gets 3. Newsome, and Newsome gets 2. And Newsome was really good, and he got an interception as well. So that was a really big play, one of my key moments I mentioned. And it's really important because you were looking at the secondary, because with Christian Kirk out, it was all the more essential that you keep Ridley from tearing you apart. And Newsome did that. He got 50 yards, and it was very spread out, and wasn't tearing us apart at all game. Didn't have too much of an impact most of the game. He had one catch in the red zone that was a nice play. But besides that, it was really quiet, and Newsome had his own interception there too. So he played really, really well. And the other thing you were worried about was coming off that Puka Nacua burning, would Emerson be able to bounce back? And he did. So those two were huge for the game. I would give Emerson the edge at 3, and then 2 for Newsome. And then at 1, I have JOK. He had a really nice tackle for a loss early. He was a little all over the place. He had 7 tackles. He led the team. And he was in many different spots doing different things, kind of being all over the field, having, a renaissance season for him. So it was nice to see. And honorable mention to Hurst. He had a nice sack in some place. But the 3 is going to be Emerson, Newsome, and JOK. What about you?
Yeah, for me, I got similar. I want to have somebody different, but at 3, I'm also giving it to MJ Emerson. He was good in coverage. He did everything that was asked of him. And yes, his picks came as a result of bad throws versus incredible coverage. Like, they were just bad throws. They weren't to the receiver. However, they weren't directly in Emerson's hands either. He still had to stretch himself out and actually make great catches. So you still want to give him some nice credit for that. And obviously, he was still there. In the right vicinity. So I think you want to give him credit for that. Greg Newsome, also 2 brownie points, did really well in coverage today as well, and that pick was also pretty nice. At 1 brownie point, I'm going to give it to Myles Garrett. He had a really clutch sack, which seems to be kind of his thing. I feel like he never gets sacks on first down or second down. It feels like this season, most of his sacks come on third down, really clutch moments. He gets that sack on that 2-point conversion. The Jags probably still would not have come back and won that game, obviously, but it made it that much more difficult. It was a nice clutch play. I want to give Myles Garrett credit because even before that, he had a lot of plays, and I don't know if these are going to register as QB hurries, but he had a lot of plays where he beat his man. He was probably being held on a lot of them, but I would have to go back and look at that to know for sure, but it looked like he was being held in my opinion, but I'm a little biased to be fair. But regardless, he had a lot of plays where he was beating his guy, and Trevor Lawrence had to just get rid of it. And it wasn't so close that it was a QB hurry that he got rid of it and then, Myles Garrett hits him right after. But he had beat his guy, and I think Trevor Lawrence registered that Myles Garrett had beaten his man. And he is like, I can get it off cleanly now, or I can try and delay it and then throw it, and then I'll get hit. And I think there were a lot of plays where I noted where I felt like Trevor Lawrence released that ball earlier than he wanted to and ended up being incomplete just because Myles Garrett beat his man. So I wanted to give him a little credit on there. I'm not saying Myles Garrett was dominant the whole game. Again, I'm giving him 1 brownie point, not 2, not 3 for a reason. But I thought he was actually better than it might have looked on paper. So I wanted to give him some credit for that. But that's going to wrap up our brownie point segment. Let's talk about the storyline of the week, which is the Browns and the playoffs. It's kind of been this big thing. The last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, I should say 3 weeks ago, I guess, it looked like a foregone conclusion that the Browns are probably going to make the playoffs, like 90%. Then we lose, we said, okay, still a really good chance. Then we lose again, we say, okay, now this game is pretty much it felt like. The Browns win this game, probably going to make the playoffs. The Browns lose this game, probably not going to make the playoffs, to be completely honest. They win this game. The Browns are now back on track to make the playoffs. Where do you think the Browns end up, though, come the end of the season? Will this team be in the playoffs? If so, will there be a wildcard team? Do you see this as potentially somehow squeezing it out and winning the division, although it does seem unlikely? Could this team still miss the playoffs? What do you see happening at the end of the season? What's most likely to you?
So the most likely thing to me is that we end up as a wild card team. I suspect the first wild card team, based on the way things are playing out, but it could be the second. But I'm thinking the first. So coming into this week, when you look at this game, this week was a very good week for the Browns. It was nearly a great week because the Rams were this close, went to overtime. They were up late in the fourth quarter. Then they had to make a late comeback because then the Ravens scored a touchdown. Then they had to make a late comeback. They go to overtime. They end up losing on a punt return touchdown there. On the return touchdown to the Ravens. So that was very unfortunate because if they had won, it would be a different story. We'd be down 1 game, and then who knows, the division might really be in play. But 2 games out, it feels a little unlikely that the Browns will catch the Ravens. But the wild card has shaken out where it's shaken out pretty well. It's not been as intense as we thought it would be coming into the year. A lot of teams have not been as good as we thought. And as such, the Browns come into this week, we were tied with the Texans, the Steelers, and the Texans, the Steelers, and the Colts. And so it was a 4-way tie. They all lost. The Browns won. The other 3 lost. So that is fortuitous. On the other hand, they also beat the Jaguars. And will the Jaguars take the division either? Who knows? They're not great over there. But they'll probably end up pulling it out. But the Texans lost to the Jets, got destroyed. That was a little bit of a surprise. I thought I had my suspicions, but they got destroyed. The Colts lost to the Bengals. Browning seems to be actually a pretty good quarterback, and he really beats up on the Colts. And then you have the Steelers losing to the Patriots. Now the Steelers, it feels like, are pretty much out of it. They lost, but the fact that they lost to the Patriots, a team that had just been shut out by the Chargers, and they lost 21-18, that it felt really like they lost, not only because first of all, you have to beat a team like the Patriots. When you're a team, especially like the Steelers, they're not like a great team, and then, they had a bad game. They're a team that's been coached perfectly to make up for it. When you then play the Patriots, who have a terrible offense, 18 points actually is pretty much about where they won. Like, up until like 2 games ago, they had been outgained in yardage every single week. The Steelers aren't a great offense, so when they put up 18 points, they're hoping to win. When they put up 18 points against the Patriots, they expect to win. To lose that game just says to me you're not a playoff team. There's only so much magic coming out of that coaching booth sideline, right? The Colts just don't feel that great. They don't feel like enough of a threat. They're okay. They're solid, but they have moments here, moments there, and then, they're kind of whatever in between. The Texans have a rookie quarterback, and ultimately, as good as he is, they have rookie quarterback moments. And you saw that today, and Tank Dell being out is very tough for him. It's his number one connection. It's his comfort zone. Without that, they just don't feel like the same Texans. And a lot of games, even when he's not, you understand, when you lose your top guy, sometimes there are games when they're not making as big of an impact as you would expect, but they allow other guys to be more open to make the impact. So when he's completely out of the game, it just creates a different dynamic. And I think you saw that. The Jets have a good defense, but that was a real beatdown. I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few struggling games in there. I think they may sneak in there as a second wild card, but I think the Browns take the first wild card. It's looking good on the offense, and we feel more confident because Flacco is showing that we can at least run a competent offense now.
And you feel more confident because Joe Flacco is running a more competent form of offense. Like just as you said, we saw last week a pretty good performance. We wanted to see him build on that. This week, another pretty good performance. The turnovers is a bit of an issue, but that's kind of been an issue for this team overall. I think they had more turnovers than any other team in the league, I believe. We're not going to focus too much on that, though, right now, because overall it is a pretty competent offense. 31 points against, I think they're the 12th ranked defense. I want to say the Jaguars, first points per game given up. So pretty competent from that. As long as they can continue with that, the defense looks like they're getting back on track. If we can hold this, the Browns look like they're back on track to make the playoffs. Again, like after those last 2 weeks, you weren't so sure anymore, but after this win, they got themselves right back on the right road. I think that we are going to see them in the wild card spot. As you said, most likely the first wild card spot. Probably could be the second wildcard spot, probably the first wildcard spot. I don't see them having a chance at the division. If the Ravens lost today, they would have had a shot. With the Ravens winning that game, I think the division is out of play, and the Browns should just focus on the wild card. I think in the future weeks in this segment, we'll probably talk a little bit more. When we have a better idea of who that matchup might be, I think we'll get a little bit more into how we think the Browns might actually do in the playoffs. But for now, we're just talking about where we think they'll actually be placement-wise. And I think we're both in agreement there. Probably the first wild card spot, second wild card spot is most likely, barring a collapse. And with the way Joe Flacco has been playing, it doesn't look like we're going to see that massive drop-off in offensive production that we were afraid of. Not that there was such a high point to begin with, but still, I think we all know what I mean. But if you want to make the playoffs, you got to win games. Next week, the Browns are playing the Bears. The Bears have been an interesting team. By record, they're terrible. By roster, also not that good. But they just beat the Lions. Pretty surprising. And they beat another team recently. I forget who. Or they were really competitive with them. I'm blanking on who it was. It might have been the Lions as well. I don't remember. But the Bears have had a couple games where they've played above their ability. What do you think we can expect, though, from this Browns-Bears matchup next week?
Yeah, so the Bears, they are interesting. The one thing is to remember is that a lot of teams do have random games where they're really good. Besides, like, the Panthers.
Exactly.
Right? And there's a few teams that are just okay, they're just terrible. But even the Jets, right? They just came out and they won 30-6. Like, they spanked the Texans. So you don't know, right? And teams do have those random moments. And there's a reason why people say any given Sunday. So you really never know for sure. I mean, if anything, any given season would be a good word too. I mean, look at the Chiefs this year. Like, no, they look at the Bills. Like, I don't know. So There's that aspect to it for sure. But the Bears, I will say also they got a few wins without their starting quarterback, Justin Fields. This week, he was back this week, though, when they beat up on the Lions. But honestly, it kind of feels like a team like that, to get that big win, it's like, yeah, and then that's kind of their win for a couple of weeks. And I don't think they're going to bounce. They're going to... I don't feel like there's a team that, they gained confidence and now they're playing well, like a Vikings team might have before the injury to Kirk Cousins when they had gone off on a run. It looked like, oh, wow, they might be really, really good. Maybe the Broncos, even they went off on a 5-game win streak, and you're thinking there is the talent. Like, who knows what might happen there? Mm-hmm. There is something that makes you pause. The Bears don't have anybody that makes you pause. It just feels like, okay, they had a couple good games. There's some talent on the roster. Good for them. But you're not really sweating it. It doesn't feel like that. It feels more like, they had a good game, more than, that's might have woke something up. So I actually think, look, because they won, the Bears, the Browns probably won't underestimate them. And at the same time, I think as long as they show up with the talent and they show up and mean it and take it seriously, they're just considerably better than the Bears. They just really are. And they should be able to shut down the offense. And the Bears don't have the world's best defense. So our offense has actually been competent. I would always feel nervous in previous matchups. But with Flacco at the helm, I've actually been, despite his mistakes, I've still felt the most confident in the offense all year that I've ever felt. So
I think they've shown the most consistency in movement.
Didn't expect that from Flacco. But that's where we are. Exactly. The most consistency. So I feel confident in that end. And from that perspective, I don't see the amount of turnovers as this past game happening. So I see more of a 24-13 Browns victory.
Okay. I mean, I'm thinking something along the similar lines as far as scoreline goes. Coming into this one, the Bears just beat the Lions. If anything, I think that makes them even less likely to beat the Browns, because I think the Bears are going to be feeling some false confidence. I think they're going to be feeling really good about themselves. Like, oh yeah, we're good. They're not good. And this does happen a lot when you see teams, bad teams will sometimes have that win or two that you don't expect from them. And often teams that aren't that good, they kind of come off a high emotion win, it's pretty normal for them they're going to regress to the mean, is what I'm getting at. The Bears had that big win, they're going to regress to the mean against the Browns, and I think it's going to be a pretty embarrassing game for them, actually. And based off the Browns' ability to put up 31 against the Jags, they were pretty competent last week. Like we were saying, that Joe Flacco has shown us the most consistency, perhaps, in the offense. Just drive to drive, they generally have been able to move. Obviously, not every single drive they're going to score, but generally speaking, we've seen a pretty consistent offense, and you felt like when they got the ball that they got a chance to score. And I think they're going to take it to the Bears next week. I think the Browns are going to win. This is a big prediction. 28-10. I think they're going to dominate the Bears on offense, defense, a complete game, and the Browns are going to be feeling really, really good about themselves next week. I think the fan base is going to be feeling really good, and I think we're going to be talking next week after this win. I think we're going to be talking about, it's still going to be only a win against the Bears, but I think we're going to be talking about the Browns as maybe they could even win a game in the playoffs next week. But it's certainly a hopeful prediction, but I was right this week about my prediction against the Jags, about them getting the win, so I'm going to say that makes me the all-knowing power on this.
Think about this. If we are the first wild card, we would play the 4th seed, right? That might very well be the Jags.
Yeah.
Looking at it right now, it's looking at the Jags. It might be a rematch of this. Now, we'd be on the road. But it feels pretty good, so something to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we're both expecting good things from the Browns overall next week against the Bears. I think this would be a huge, huge disappointment if they somehow blew this game against the Bears. Yes, maybe they won't win 28-10. Maybe they won't have 14, 21 points. But I think if they lost this game, it would be a massive, massive disappointment. And would really hurt them on the run to the playoffs, because after these last two losses, they kind of lost some of their wiggle room. But I think overall they'll be okay. I think the Browns will make the playoffs. Most of us still fill that probably in the first wildcard spot, maybe the second. But we're going to wrap up that episode here. Thank you for listening with us. We hope to see you next week. If you want to, if you can, give us a follow on Twitter/X at Brownie Points 99. We do run a lot of polls, and it's a great chance for you to interact with us. We're also on YouTube, and we are on TikTok. So give us a follow. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.